somewhere between the 12th century and the Industrial Revolution. There was one plant that fed millions of European peasants. It wasn't sold in markets. It wasn't planted every year. You put it in the ground just once, and it fed you for life. Then it disappeared, not because it failed, but because it succeeded to well. This plant was called Good King Henry, and erasing it from history was no accident. Imagine with me a European peasant's garden in 1550. In March, thick stalks emerge from the soul-tasting but sweet asparagus. In May, rich green leaves appear resembling spinach, and they keep growing until winter. For entire centuries, this plant was the backbone of medieval soups, mixed with leeks, chard, and bred in a vitamin-rich broth that kept peasant farmers alive through brutal winters. The Romans knew it. Emperor Tiberius demanded it as tribute from Germanic tribes. The emperor wanted it that badly. And why? The nutritional value was insane. A study published in 1989 mirrored this plant's nutritional content. Then another evaluation came in 2022. The result: iron, higher than spinacalcium, higher than milk vitamin C, crazy levels of vitamins, more than most leafy greens. Complete nutrition from a plant that needs no annual work, no tilling, no replanting, no seeds to buy every spring. It appeared every year like a loyal friend. So. Where is it now? Why are we spending billions of dollars genetically modifying crops when the perfect plant already exists? The answer isn't a conspiracy. It's an engineering problem. In 1701, an English farmer named Jethro Tull invented the mechanical seed drill. It was a brilliant machine, but it had one condition: uniformity. The machine favored annual crops, those planted from scratch every year in perfectly straight rows. Wheat, corn, turnips. But Good King Henry, it was chaotic. It grew in clumps. It spread by roots. It didn't stay in straight lines. It couldn't be planted by machine. It couldn't be harvested mechanically. In the language of emerging industrial agriculture, it was inefficient. Then came 1837. John Deere invented the steel plow. For the first time, farmers could break virgin prairie soil and turn it into farmland. But perennial root systems, those that Good King Henry developed over decades, were the enemy of the plow. They held soil together. They resisted breaking. Annual crops with their shallow, weak roots. Easy. You plow, you plant, you harvest, you plow again. The system chose annual crops, not because they were better for soil, or nutrition, or farmers, but because they were better for machines. In 1900, the tractor replaced the horse. Every machine built was designed for one thing: wipe the earth clean and start fresh every spring. Perennials like Good King Henry fought back. Their roots went down 3 feet. They held soil. They broke plows. In the eyes of the machine, this plant's greatest strength, its resilience, became its fatal flaw. It was labeled inefficient, not because it didn't feed people, but because it slowed down the tractor. If you're enjoying the video so far, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. The next part of the story is more dangerous than the machines. Machines were the weapon, but the business model was the motive. In the 1920s, the modern commercial seed industry exploded. Companies like Burpee and Fairy Morse realized a fundamental truth of capitalism: perennial plants are a terrible product. Think about it. If I sell you a packet of spinach seeds, you have to come back and buy more next year, and the year after, and the year after. Recurring revenue. If I sell you Good King Henry seeds, I'll never see you again. You plant it once, and your children are still eating from it 20 years later. It's self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency is the enemy of profit. By 1950, seed catalogs quietly dropped perennial vegetables. Good King Henry disappeared from commercial offerings, not because it stopped working, but because it worked perfectly. In 1960, Norman Borlaug introduced high-yielding dwarf wheat varieties. The promise was simple: more calories per acre. The cost was hidden: total dependence on synthetic fertilizers, mechanization, and annual replanting. The Green Revolution saved 1 billion people from starvation. That's true, but it also locked global agriculture into a system where perennial plants had no place. Governments subsidized annual grain crops, universities focused research budgets on corn, wheat, and soybeans. Agricultural services taught farmers to think in planting seasons, not in perennial plots. We bet the entire farm on annual crops. We chose wheat, corn, and soy. We accepted a system where 70% of our cropland requires violent tillage every year, destroying soil, releasing carbon, and demanding synthetic fertilizers just to keep growing. We traded a plant that takes care of itself for plants on life support. Today, annual crops occupy 70% of global cropland. Perennial crops, only 13%. Think about this, 94% of all plant species on Earth are perennial, but only 13% of our farmland grows them. We chose the exception and made it the rule. And what did we lose? Start with the soil. Annual agriculture requires tillage. Every year you break the earth open, plant seeds, then leave the soil bare for months. Wind erosion, water runoff, carbon release. The American Dust Bowl of the 1930s happened because of exactly this, plowing up perennial prairie grasses and replacing them with annual wheat. Perennials like Good King Henry have root systems that go down 3 feet or more. They hold soil together year-round. They prevent erosion. They sequester carbon. Research from the Land Institute shows that perennial crops reduce soil erosion by 50% compared to annuals. Then there's water. Annual crops lose up to 5 times more water than perennials because their shallow roots can't access deep moisture. In a world facing water scarcity, we built our entire food system around the most water inefficient plants possible. And the chemicals, annual monocultures, need synthetic fertilizers because tillage destroys soil biology. They need pesticides because bare fields are vulnerable to weeds and pests. Perennials like Good King Henry needed none of this. Their deep roots accessed nutrients other plants couldn't reach. Their year-round coverage suppressed weeds. Naturally, we're now paying the price for that decision. Soil erosion, water scarcity, nutrient collapse. The annual experiment is failing, but nature plays the long game while tractors were conquering the fields. Good King Henry didn't actually die. It retreated. It survived in the Mojans. In the gardens of stubborn grandmothers in Yorkshire, in wild patches near old monasteries, in the mountains of Switzerland. And now the vault is opening again because the rules are changing. We're finally realizing that efficiency isn't efficient if it destroys the soil. In 2009, the Land Institute released Kernza, the first commercially viable perennial grain. It took decades of breeding, but perennial wheat is finally becoming real. Climate change is forcing us to reconsider annual crops. Soil degradation is accelerating. Water is becoming scarce. And suddenly, the characteristics we bred out of our food system, deep roots, permanent coverage, self-sufficiency, look less like inefficiency and more like survival. In 2022, the USDA updated the Conservation Stewardship Program to include perennials for the first time. It's a small change, but it signals something bigger, recognition that the annual monoculture system is not sustainable long-term. And Good King Henry, it never actually disappeared. You can buy its seeds online today. You can plant them this spring. And unlike every other vegetable you grow, you won't have to plant them again. They'll return every year for the next 20 years. The shoots will appear in March, the leaves will follow in April. And you'll taste something most people haven't tasted in a century. Food that doesn't depend on a system. Food that opts out of the machine. Food that grows on its own timeline, by its own rules, without asking permission. King Henry IV of France promised in 1593 that he wanted a chicken in every peasant's pot every Sunday. It was a beautiful promise, a political promise of abundance. But while the king was making speeches, the peasants were already eating. They didn't need a chicken, and they didn't need a king, because for 500 years, their pots had been filled by a different Henry. This one wasn't a monarch, It was a plant. King Henry IV's promise of a chicken in every pot depended on wealth, on commerce, on a functioning economy. When economies collapsed, the promise failed. The other Henry, the plant that lived in gardens for 500 years, asked for nothing. It just grew. One made a promise that required the world to cooperate. The other kept a promise the world had forgotten how to hear. And maybe now, we're starting to listen again. When those shoots come up next March, and the March after that, and the March after that, you'll participate in a quiet rebellion. You'll be eating food that exists outside the industrial timeline. Food that doesn't need a tractor, doesn't need a seed company, doesn't need a king's permission. Some promises are made with words, and some are kept in roots that refuse to die. Plant the future. The next vault opens soon.